Hi, my name is Olivia Shliva, and it is July 24th, 2019, and this is my Unit 2 Case Connections video, and I will be discussing Case 2 and Case 3. So let's go ahead and get into our first one. So Case 2 discusses the regulation of glucose uptake by the cell and how that may differ in tumors versus surrounding tissues. So we'll look at these three questions in more detail as we go on, but first let's look at this scan right here and discuss this image. So as you can see, this is an MRI image, and there is a large white mass right here. And this indicates the glioblastoma, or the tumor of the brain that our patient has. And then this scan on the right is the PET scan, and that is after the individual has been administered a fluorescent dye labeled with D-glucose. So before we begin answering these questions, let's go ahead and review glucose metabolism. So as we discussed at the beginning of the course, the general overview of glucose metabolism can be summarized in a few short steps, and I really like to return to this to just help me get a bigger, broader picture of what's going on, because sometimes it's really easy to get bogged down in all of these details. So I wanted to go over this really quick. So first, after we've eaten something, after a meal, glucose is metabolized through glycolysis. So it enters right here. And then this is converted into pyruvate or lactic acid, depending on if it's anaerobic or aerobic conditions. If under aerobic conditions, the pyruvate is then converted into acetyl-CoA with the use of pyruvate dehydrogenase. And so after it's converted into acetyl-CoA, it will enter into the citric acid cycle, or the TCA cycle, in the mitochondria. And then once it's here, it goes through a series of reactions where it produces reducing equivalents, NADH and FADH2. And then these reducing equivalents are shuttled into the electron transport chain, where ultimately there's a large amount of ATP produced and produced through oxidative phosphorylation. So that's our general overview. So let's go ahead and go back to our prompt. So because the body is constantly taking measures to maintain homeostasis, there are several regulatory measures in place for glucose uptake in different tissues, such as the skeletal muscle, liver, the brain, and the adipose tissue. This can be seen specifically in regards to the glucose transporters, which facilitate the uptake of glucose in each of these tissues. So in the liver, glucose is uptaken by GLUT2, while GLUT3 and GLUT4, GLUT3 and GLUT1 are found in the brain. All these transporters are considered to function in an insulin-independent manner, and that means specifically that these transporters are present despite elevated or lowered insulin levels, which allows for the metabolism of glucose to continue. In the skeletal muscle, however, as well as the adipose tissue, we see an insulin-dependent glucose transporter, which is GLUT4. This transporter is only present in the presence of insulin, and it's found in the membrane. It's membrane bound, and it's only available to bind to insulin when there's insulin around. So how does glucose uptake in normal tissues compare to that seen in tumor cells? So to really answer this question, we have to understand cancer. So in cancer, there are various pathologies depending on the cancer type. However, all began as an unregulated proliferation in the cells of the body. So in the case of our female patient, she would be experiencing excess amounts of proliferation in her brain, because that's where her glioblastoma is. This would likely require more energy and glucose, and that can be kind of visualized right here in this PET image on the right, which shows this fluorescence happening after we administer glucose, which suggests that there's increased glucose uptake occurring. This increased glucose uptake would be advantageous for the tumor because it allows for an increased amount of glucose to be used as fuel for the production of new biomasses such as the tumor, and that could eventually metastasize to other parts of the body. So what modifications occur in the cell to alter this glucose uptake? Well, as we learned, glucose is the main source of fuel for the brain, and it enters the brain through the blood-brain barrier, as you can see kind of right here, by attaching to this glucose transporter, so either GLUT1 or GLUT3, and it enters in right here. During tumorigenesis, so basically the production of tumors, glucose transporters such as GLUT1 or GLUT3 are deregulated, so there's not as much regulation of these transporters, and that allows for there to be an increased amount of glucose to be taken up into the cell, as I mentioned in the previous slide. So if there's an increased amount of glucose taken up into the cell, that can be used for fuel for the generation of new biomasses like tumors later on down the road. So now I'll discuss case 3, which looks at the insulin levels of a 5-year-old boy. So this patient exhibited increased fatigue, polydipsia, and increased urination. And so the patient doctor ordered routine blood work that looked at the insulin measurements initially, and then after receiving glucose, 1 hour after receiving glucose. So as you can see in this table, the patient had significantly lower serum levels both before receiving glucose and then after receiving glucose in comparison to the control patient, significantly lower levels. So based on this information, the underlying biochemical basis for the patient's symptoms would lie within the insulin and glucose relationship. From a clinical standpoint, the patient's age and symptoms are extremely suggestive of type 1 diabetes or insulin-dependent diabetes mellitus. So let's talk more about that. So in a normal functioning pancreas, insulin is secreted in response to elevated glucose levels to stimulate glucose uptake in other parts of the body. However, in insulin-dependent diabetes mellitus, or type 1 diabetes, insulin production in the beta islet cells of the pancreas are decreased, which corresponds to the decreased serum insulin levels as we saw in the chart on the last slide. So several things result from this decreased insulin production, indicating reduced rates of glucose metabolism and increased amounts of blood glucose. Because there's excess amount of glucose in the blood, the kidneys are unable to reabsorb all of this, and that results in glycosuria, which is the excretion of glucose in the urine. And additionally, given that glucose is an osmotic diuretic, there's excess glucose around, and if there's excess glucose around, such as with diabetes patients, there will likely be an increased amount of urination occurring, which is a very common symptom in diabetes patients as well. And since the body's excreting excess amounts of fluid, a signal is also triggered to produce polydipsia, or an increased fluid intake, so the need to drink lots of fluid, which this patient also exhibited. So what would occur to the patient's fasted blood glucose? So given that the blood glucose in diabetes patients is elevated due to decreased insulin secretion, it can be assumed that if the patient's blood were tested after fasting, it would show above normal ranges of the blood glucose levels. So it would be above the normal limits of 70 to 99 milligrams per deciliter. Finally, which 2 regulatory enzymes would be activated? So because type 1 diabetes is caused by decreased production of insulin, I focus on the regulatory enzymes found in gluconeogenesis specifically, because this pathway is activated during the fasted state, and during the fasted state there's decreased insulin production. So, and this can be found in chapter 19 of our textbook if you want to read more about it. So first off, the 3 regulatory enzymes that are found in this pathway are pyruvate carboxylase, which is found right here, and then fructose 1,6-bisphosphate, which is here, and then glucose 6-phosphate up here. So because glucose 6-phosphate results in the production of free glucose, as you can see here, after converting glucose 6-phosphate into that free glucose, I decided that this enzyme would likely be increased because we see that elevated blood glucose levels in diabetes patients. Additionally, I suspected that fructose 1,6-bisphosphate would also be increased, and that's because fructose 1,6-bisphosphate converts this fructose 1,6-bisphosphate into fructose 6-phosphate, which goes on to produce the glucose 6-phosphate, which then goes on to produce the free glucose. So it's kind of this chain reaction right here. And since there's increased amounts of glucose in diabetic patients, there would be an overall increased amount of blood glucose from this free glucose right here. So I assumed that fructose 1,6-bisphosphate would also be elevated because we would expect that in diabetes patients. So that is all I have for you all. So thank you, and I'll hear from y'all soon.